Welcome to the Vietnamese Poetry, Literature channel. Today we will listen to the work, Mother Pear's House, by author Thach Lam. Let's listen. Don Thon is a shabby market street near a small district town in Central Asia. Two rows of shabby houses have low thatched roofs that almost reach the steps, half covering the rotten bamboo huts. Nearby are ramshackle market stalls surrounding a brick house with an attic covered like a bird's nest, built by a rich man in the village to sell goods. The people in the market street are 7 or 8 poor families whose whereabouts are unknown, which people in the district often call contemptuously, squatters. They came here to earn a living for several years, starving and doing odd jobs, some pulling carts, some fighting, or working as hired laborers for rich families in the village. People call every family by the mother's name: Heen's mother's house, Doi's mother's house, Lee's mother's house. These families are similar in that they are both equally poor. Lee's mother's family is a single mother's family with 11 children. Uncle La is a sturdy and short country woman. Her face and limbs are wrinkled like a dried canarium. When he first arrived in town, everyone paid attention to his children, 11 children, and the eldest was only 17 years old. The youngest child was still carried in his arms. My mother and I live in a thatched house. That many people were crowded into a space about the width of 2 mats, with only one broken slat bed. In the cold season, a bed of straw is spread all over the house. Mother and child sleep together in it. It looks like a dog bed. A mother dog and puppies are crowded together. For a poor person like you, a place like that is quite decent. But how about making a living? Uncle La struggled and struggled all day long, but could not afford to feed so many children. From the foggy morning, in the hot and cold seasons, he had to get up to work for the people in the village. During those days when someone hired him, although he had to work hard, he was sure to get a few bowls of rice and a few coins in the evening to feed his hungry children waiting at home. Those were happy days. But in the cold season, when the rice fields have been harvested, the fields are left with only stubble, under the cold north wind, like a sharp knife cutting into the skin. Mr. La is afraid, because no one will hire him to do anything anymore. So the whole family starved. The youngest children, Tai, Fun, Hai that her sister carried, they cried without food. Under their torn clothes, their flesh was bruised from the cold like the flesh of a dead buffalo. Uncle La hugged his child in a straw nest, hoping to warm him up with his warmth. From morning, the older son went with Ba to the fields to look for crabs and snails, or after the harvest, to glean the remaining rice flowers in the fields. What a joy it would be if they brought home a bunch on lucky days. Uncle La hastily pushed his son away, grabbed the bundle of rice, put it at his feet, crushed it, scooped up the grains and pounded them to get rice. Then, making a hot meal on a cold evening, mother and child sat around the steaming pot of rice, while outside the cold wind whistled through the thatched roof. The life of Mr. Lee's family continued like that, quietly passing from day to day. However, there are also happy days. On warm sunny days of the year, or summer afternoons, Mr. La and his mother played together in front of the house. The neighbors did the same. The mothers sat whispering secret stories to each other, children played in the market stall, and old women sat and shook their hair and trimmed it with sharp pieces of bottle. The eldest boy sat and knitted a hat. There were other children playing nearby. During the hot summer days, every one of Mr. Lee's children got sore heads. He said it was a disease that had been passed down from his ancestors, so he used a green product to apply it to them. My mother and I look even more like a flock of chickens, and the chicks' heads are painted green to avoid confusion. People in the market often joke with Uncle La about his large number of children. Uncle Doi, who pulls the rickshaw, is the happiest person in the neighborhood. He never passes by Uncle Lee's house without saying, "You have to remember to count from time to time so you don't forget." Uncle La always answered the same question. Lose less to make him less guilty. But everyone knows that Uncle La loves you very much. Although you are very fair, people can see that you love Hai the most. He is the 9th child, the sickest and palest in the family. He often picked it up and kissed it, then showed it off to the neighbors. He was the only one in the whole family that looked exactly like him and his nephew. Then he held his child and sat quietly for a moment, as if remembering something from a long time ago. On moonlit nights in summer, the whole northern street sat outside on mats, because every house was as hot as an oven, and tens of thousands of mosquitoes were buzzing. Under the shadow of the moon, the stones on the road looked black and shimmering with light. The soil still retains the afternoon heat and gives off a unique smell, mixed with the smell of dirty garbage and sand. Everyone gathered together to talk. Children ran around the mothers, seemingly forgetting the misery and humbleness. Everyone happily chatted, laughter as loud and long as adults, mixed with the giggles of the girls huddled close together. In the darkness, people could hear Uncle Heen's voice echoing, Uncle Doi's voice recounting the lucky journey. In a house, there was the sound of a hammock and the shrill singing of the lady's husband, who took all the money she earned from her husband's car trip to the store to buy a kilo of jujubes, then lay in the hammock, chewing and singing the military drum, Once Upon a Time. There is Mr. Trong Kai. A few years later, making a living became more and more difficult. The market was not as crowded as before. People could no longer hear the voices talking in the early morning mist of flute vendors carrying rice on boats to bring to the district to sell. Famine came time and time again in the market streets. Every day, Uncle Heen carries goods to go and then carries goods back. I often see Mr. Doi pulling an empty cart, wandering around the district, and his wife no longer lies in a hammock singing military drums. At that time, Uncle La went around to every house in the village, asking for a job, but none of the houses with fields hired him. Even if he worked for free, people would only give him half a bowl of rice, which was not enough for his 3 children to eat. Fasting days are consecutive. Uncle La saw that his children were getting thinner and thinner. In the afternoon, he returned exhausted and depressed. He asked the eldest son if he had caught any fish. He sadly shook his head and replied that the lakes and ponds were banned. Don't let it be ignored anymore. The cold season that year came, cold and rainy and muddy. Mr. Lee's children hugged each other tightly and shivered in the damp and dark house because there were no more lights. The families in the market street are all hungry, cold and miserable. But each family was quiet, silent and suffered alone, without complaining to their neighbors. Everyone knew they were equally poor. One afternoon, when his children had been starving all day, Uncle La patched up his coat, called the eldest child over and said, "Stay home and take care of the children, I'll go to Mr. Ba and see if I can get some rice. You went into the house this morning and they didn't let you in." Mr. Fuck said that if you came in again, he would let the dog out and bite you. Uncle La replied, "But how? If you don't have it, where will you get rice to eat?" "Well, let's take a risk and see if it works." Having finished speaking, Mr. La opened the door and left. He still had a little hope in his heart that morning when he came in to ask for rice. Mr. Ba chased and scolded him and refused to let him. He remembered the luxurious and cozy scene in Mr. Ba's house. Porcelain pots and couplets gilded with bright gold. Is it possible that Mr. Ba is so rich that he doesn't give his mother and son a bowl of rice? At home, the children sat looking at each other and waiting in the straw nest. Wherever you go, you don't come back. Hai listened to the sound of dogs biting in the village and then told his sister. "Looks like you're back, sister." The eldest boy walked to the kitchen door and looked outside. Suddenly there was a loud sound of footsteps, a call, then the children saw Uncle Doi and another person carrying Uncle La into the house. On the mother's calf, red blood flowed. The eldest son immediately understood that his mother had been bitten by Mr. Ba's dog. He placed the injured person on the mat and left after instructing Now, take a lolot leaf and apply it to stop the bleeding. Western dog bites are very poisonous. When he left, the children gathered around their mother. Hai cried and asked, "What's wrong with you, huh?" Uncle La suppressed the pain and told his child, "Truly fuck is so evil. If I didn't give it, I would let the dog chase me. I ran but couldn't keep up, so it bit me. Luckily I met Uncle Doi, but I don't know when I will be able to get home." He stopped and looked at his sick children, then sighed. "So what should your mother eat to quench her hunger now?" Hai burst into tears, and Tai also cried. Uncle La raised his arms and hugged them, thinking about his fate. He also shed tears. That night, Uncle La had a fever. Cold shivers ran one after another across his skin. The torn mat was not enough to warm his body. While delirious, Mr. La remembered his whole life, from when he was a child until now, only full of days of suffering and hardship. Poverty does not know when it entered my house. When I was born I saw it, and from then on it kept following me. But having someone to hire you is not so bad. He remembered the hard days at work, but he was happy to bring home rice for his children, the hot meals in the cold season, the times when Hai and Tai playfully fought over the cake he bought for them. Then came the tiring days of gleaning rice in the fields, picking up fragrant rice flowers, the times when crushing rice under his feet. Uncle La remembered the feeling of joy when he saw the edge of the rice flower being sharp against his skin. Those were also full days. Then came the morning markets, fasting days like today. Uncle dreamed of seeing the bright gold in Mr. Ba's house, seeing Mr. Fuck's evil face, and the western dog baring its fangs and leaning forward. "Oh my God! Why am I so miserable?" His scream startled the children. They sat up and looked at their mother in fear. 2 days later, Mr. La fell into delirium again and died. People in the market town gathered together to buy him a pile of wooden planks, then took him to the field and buried him under a small cemetery at the beginning of the village. When they returned, through the cold and gloomy house, they saw Uncle Lee's small children sitting on the sidewalk. Tai was trying to calm Hai's crying, lying that his mother was going to the market for a while and would return. But they knew that Uncle La would not return, and they felt a sense of fear oppressing their hearts. Those who remained, those still alive whose poverty continued to pursue them forever. At the end of the work, please support me with the like button and subscribe to the channel to listen to more works.